Hey folks, Ben here. So we played D&D on Wednesday and I want to talk to you about how it went. I think it could have gone better, but that's the reason we're making these videos so that you don't make the same mistakes that I do. When last we left our heroes, they were outside of Broken Spire Keep. My friend Joe, playing Rule the Human Thief, decided to go over and scout out and infiltrate the keep. He waited till dusk and snuck across the open field, climbed the tower, and killed the orc lookout. Then he stealthed his way down into the keep and started mapping the place out in his head. Joe and I met up the day before the game to roleplay his character moving through the keep. Now, what I normally do with dungeon crawls is I'll draw out the map for my players in front of them as they progress through the dungeon. But this time I did it a little bit differently. I handed Joe the graph paper and a pencil and made him take notes on everything that he saw throughout the keep. I described it to him, the dimensions of the room and where the doors were and what he saw, to kind of give him the ability to mess up, and if he does, that's just his character's imperfect recollection of what he saw. We played for about 2 hours, in which he sabotaged and destroyed some of the supplies of the keep. Then he got into a little bit of a skirmish, took out some of the orcs, but eventually they caught wise to him and raised the alarm. After that, he fled into the lower levels of the keep and found the prisons. And that's where I cut back to the other half of the group. The other half of the party hears the alarm go off and think, oh crap, we're going to have to go in there and save him. So Kita, the paladin, played by my friend Rachel, Alris, the eldritch knight, played by my friend Stacy, and Callan, the wizard, played by my friend Jeff, start making their way through the forest around to the front of the keep to assault the main gates. They run into a patrol of a couple of orcs and a hellhound, which they are all too familiar with. They kill the hellhound as quickly as possible, and then out of nowhere, a group of elven rangers show up and dispatch the rest of the orcs. The leader of this band of wood elf rangers approaches the players. He introduces himself as Thuriel, guardian of the forest. He informs the players that these orcs have been destroying and pillaging his forest for several months now, and they haven't really been able to do anything about it because of their hellhounds. Unfortunately, most of the players in the encounter didn't really take it too seriously, I think due to, in part, because of my role-playing. The way that I portrayed this character wasn't really in line with how he would act. There are two main ways of role-playing a character, and that's third person and first person. Both ways of doing it are equally right, and you could do either way that feels comfortable for you. The way that I'm more comfortable doing it is third person, but I really want to be able to do a first person portrayal of a character, and it's very frustrating to not be able to do that. It's very frustrating in the beginning when you're still building up that skill like I am. Really the only advice I have for nailing a first person portrayal of a character is just practice. You're going to look stupid a lot before you actually get it down. So we jump back to Rule, the human thief. He's found a couple of prisoners in the dungeons of the keep. He finds Sir Arkazovar, a dragonborn knight, 2 guards of the Baron's caravan, Volin and Wella, and he finds the elven ranger Valindra. Again, I really messed up the first-person dialogue of these characters. I really didn't have any dialogue planned out, and I don't think that that's a flaw so much as I'm just not good at improvising first-person dialogue on the spot quite yet. I need a little bit more practice before I can really get it down. So as Rule is talking with these prisoners, he hears from outside the dungeons a human voice. The voice calls out, "Attention, those of you in the dungeons. Surrender now, and we'll let most of you out alive." Now I know that there is no way that my players are going to surrender, at least not willingly. So I made sure that there was at least some way for them to get some equipment before they start so that they have a kind of a full party with Rule and Roland the Druid along with these 4 NPCs. So I have the players roll an investigation check, and they find a secret door. Now I made sure to put this secret door in the dungeons just in case something like this would happen. The secret door leads to the secret study of the evil priest that lives here with the orcs. Inside the study, they find a few magic items. They find a white arrow I describe as almost being made of bone or ivory. They don't really know what it does, but it looks pretty menacing. They find a smooth round stone that I describe as donut-shaped almost, with a hole in the center. And they find a scroll with 3 spells written on it. And when I went to go tell them what was on the scroll, after they handed it off to the druid player, I realized that I had made a huge blunder. I didn't actually write down what was on the scroll in my notes. Another GM tip for you guys: make sure to read over your notes for the session before sitting down and playing. Make sure that you have everything written down and you know what's going on, especially with the treasure. So I ended up having to frantically flip through the player's handbook to find a couple of spells that were suitable. So I picked some interesting spells and handed them off to the druid, and the 2 of them had enough weapons to go around to equip each of the NPCs with at least 1 weapon. So at this point I jump back to the other half of the party again. They're still talking to the Elven Rangers. They ask the leader, Thuriel, to go with them into the keep on good faith so that they can rescue their friend, Father Tace. Thuriel agrees and has his retinue of Elven Rangers surround the keep and make sure that nobody gets in or out. At this point, I could have done something cooler than what I ended up doing. I just had a couple of orcs standing on the ramparts, firing arrows at the party as they made their way across the open field to the keep. But I think that it was still pretty interesting for them to have to sprint across, avoiding arrow fire. So the Paladin and the Eldritch Knight get up to the portcullis that seals off the rest of the keep, and with their immense strength scores, they lift the portcullis and allow the 4 of them into the keep, where they get into the courtyard, and immediately they're in combat. Inside the courtyard, waiting for them, are 8 orcs, 2 hellhounds, and a hill giant. Now I know throwing that many enemies against 3 players and 1 NPC that are level 4 seems a little unfair, but I give my players a lot of really strong magic items very early on to kind of entice them into playing the game, and it makes it more fun for the players, so they're actually a way higher level per se than they would be normally. Despite the fact that the encounter wasn't actually as difficult as it looked on paper, it still felt difficult to the players, mostly because I included hellhounds in the encounter. Back when they were in the Goblin Mine, there was a single hellhound that basically annihilated most of the party. Nobody died, but there were at least 3 of them that were rolling death saves. So from that point on, the players have basically been traumatized by hellhounds. Despite their phobia of hellhounds, the battle actually went in their favor almost from the start. The first thing that happened was Callan the Wizard cast invisibility on himself and then snuck across to the other side of the courtyard behind enemy lines. He cast Sleep on a couple of the orcs who immediately dropped. At this point, my friend Jennifer, who plays a bard named Alice, shows up to the game. She was a little late, but she showed up just in time to help out her allies, and she casts Blindness on the Hill Giant. So the Hill Giant is completely incapacitated for the first half of the combat, and then the second half of the combat, I can't roll above an 8 with both of his attacks, so he basically doesn't even get a hit off the entire encounter. Keita the Paladin and Alris the Eldritch Knight begin to close with the Hellhounds and the rest of the orcs and start finishing them off. The NPC Ranger starts firing at the Hellhounds, and after a couple of rounds of combat and the Bard getting to -2 hit points and failing 2 death saves, the enemies are vanquished and the players emerge victorious. So we cut back to Rule and Roland and the NPCs that are basically trapped in the prisons at this point. They're surrounded by enemies on the outside of the door, and they don't really have an avenue of escape. So they formulate a plan to feign surrender. They call out to Rosad, the evil priest, and let him know that they are surrendering, and they're dropping their weapons. So he and his retinue can enter the prisons and arrest them. And the reason that they're pretending to surrender is to basically draw the enemies into the prison room so that they only have to fight a small number of enemies at a time, whereas if they went out to the main corridor, it would be a much larger area and more of the enemies could reach the players at once. Altogether, it was a pretty successful plan. Unfortunately, we ran out of time right as they were about to start combat. I hadn't been paying attention to the time and hadn't been paying attention to how much time I was giving each group because they had split the party, and because of that, I had completely neglected the players that were in the dungeons. So the lesson there, I would say, is to be very careful about time management, practice good habits with making sure that each player feels like they're getting enough time during each session. I think next time the players suggest splitting the party, I'll gently remind them about this issue that we had during this session. I definitely wouldn't prevent them from splitting the party. If that's what they want to do, that's on them. But I would definitely nudge them in the direction of staying together so that it's easier for us to make sure that everybody has their chance in the spotlight. I think this session, it was really the combat that made it difficult to switch between groups. So for the last of my notes on the session, I just want to briefly talk about the enemies that are running Broken Spire Keep. Rosad, the evil priest of the god of undeath, and Bonebreaker Doracor, he is the orc chieftain, and his lieutenant, a orc assassin that I specifically put in the game for my friend Joe. He hasn't gotten a lot of cool magic items, so I gave this particular orc assassin a really cool, intelligent magic dagger that he'll be getting. It doesn't have a lot of powers now, but it'll grow as the game progresses. But the real issue with the bad guys currently is that the players don't even know their names. I completely forgot to introduce the main bad guys of this area to the players in a memorable and interesting way. Most of the players forgot even the reason that they came to Broken Spire Keep in the first place, which was only because they found a note on the orc lieutenant in the goblin mine back a couple of sessions ago, stating that they were going to bring Tace here. So to remedy this, I think what I'll do next session is I'll start the session off with the group in the courtyard. After their combat with the hill giant and the orcs and the hellhounds, I'll have them talk to the elven ranger that they've allied themselves with, and he'll give them a little bit more backstory on the keep and who's running the place. Then once I get that out of the way, I'll go ahead and jump to Rule and Roland and everybody in the prisons, and I'll begin that fight. We actually ended off last night on initiative, so next session they'll be jumping right into a combat. I think what I'll do to bring the two groups together is after a couple of rounds of combat, I'll have the group above show up on the other side of the enemies to basically flank them. They'll have to fight through all of the enemies that were left out in the corridor, and then they'll be able to get into the jail cells, and they'll be able to flank with the players that were trapped in the secret room. So that was last session. Hopefully we will be playing again the Wednesday after next. Thank you so much for watching, and I really enjoy making these videos. I hope you guys enjoy watching them. If you do, go ahead and click the subscribe button and click the little bell to get alerted when I post new videos. They usually come out every other week when we play. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next session.